Telecommunications International Cooperation Amendment Bill, third reading.
Call on Government Orders of the Day numbers 12 to 15.
Taxation, Annual Rates, Returns, Filing and Remedial Matters Bill, Committee Stage continued. Legislation Bill, Committee Stage, Airports, Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill, Committee Stage. International Finance Agreements Amendment Bill, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for further consideration of the Taxation, Annual Rates, Returns, Filing and Remedial Matters Bill, in consideration of the Legislation Bill, the Airports, Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill and the International Finance Agreements Amendment Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. Members, the House and Committee for further consideration of the Taxation, Annual Rates, Returns, Filing and Remedial Matters Bill, and for consideration of the Legislation Bill, the Airports, Cost Recovery for Processing of International Travellers Bill and the International Finance Agreements Amendment Bill. Members, we come first to the Taxation, Annual Rates, Returns, Filing and Remedial Matters Bill. When the committee last considered the bill, we had reached part 5 and the Honourable David Cunliffe had the call. He has 3 minutes and 20 seconds remaining if he so wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
That's incredibly generous of you to remember back that far, sir, and I'm delighted to take up the other 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I'd actually temporarily forgotten that my last soliloquy was so rudely interrupted by the clock. So let's pick it up from where we left off, which of course is that this bill, which Labor supports, the Chairman will be pleased to know, is part of a much broader plan that the Labor opposition has for creating jobs by supporting our exporters to expand and to earn more, and to help Kiwis get the education and skills that they need to seize the job opportunities of tomorrow. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But none of that is going to happen unless we have a tax system that works for our businesses and for our people. It's important that we grow our jobs and businesses by investing in science and innovation so that we can own the intellectual property rights that will help us command a premium in overseas markets. And we also want to be able to help Kiwis save for a first home. This is a long-held and long-cherished part of the Kiwi dream, that you can own your own patch of dirt. But in order to achieve that, we need to have a reasonable tax system that encourages home ownership. So how does this bill fit in? Well, despite the fact that in general the picture that New Zealanders are seeing is that under national things are slipping backwards, that they sadly, the member for Rotorua, they sadly don't have a plan for taking us forward, that they're increasingly out of touch with ordinary Kiwis, spending their time debating things like their defence of .com actions and so forth, whereas what ordinary Kiwis are saying to us is, actually, we care more about paying the bills. You know? Yes, Labor, you've caught them out, but it's time you came back, government, to what matters to us, paying the bills, putting the roof over our head, getting the kids through school, making sure that the hospital's there when they need them, and that's what we're determined to do. This bill makes a very small contribution to a few good things. I'm just going to run through a couple of them. It raises the employee contribution rate for KiwiSaver from 2% to 3%. Now, the irony of that is, of course, that only 2 years ago National cut the KiwiSaver rate from 4% to 2%. But we are broad-minded. We are pleased to see that the government has now admitted that it got it wrong, and it's doing a U-turn, which we now are pleased to support. It's a small U-turn. They went from 4 to 2, now they've gone from 2 to 3, and for them that's a revolution. It's a very small revolution. It's a step in the right direction. It's worth noting that Labor's KiwiSaver plan that was taken to the last election would have increased the savings rate by 4 times over National's plan, 4 times. And that would have been of huge benefit to savers, to the banking system, to our businesses that wanted to access investment capital, that Labor's KiwiSaver Plus plan would have really guaranteed a good savings future. Mr Chairman.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Chairman, what the chopping and changing on KiwiSaver does, though, is it undermines New Zealanders' confidence, and it does nothing to improve our dire savings situation. So what we'd recommend to the government, we're supporting this increase from 2% to 3%. Why don't you get with the program and increase it to 12% or 19%, which is what the Australians are doing through their employer contribution? That would be real change. This is just tinkering. We're supporting it just because it's going in the right direction. It's a small step. Mr Speaker, the bill also confirms that GST applies to late payments. Now, the Minister claims that he's merely trying to clarify the law around GST on late payments, but tax experts say that late payment fees were neither particularly good nor were they a service, and therefore they weren't supported by the first principles approach to GST. That's complicated tax language with the fact that this confusion should never have occurred in the first place. We support the tidy up, but it really shouldn't have been there. Mr Speaker, the National Government, of course, has bad form on GST. I'm sorry to have to remind the House of this, but of course we all have emblazoned in our mind the indelible picture of John Key facing the camera and recalling that he would never raise GST. And then in a sudden stroke of amnesia, he forgot and he raised it, and then said that he never promised he wouldn't. It's extraordinary, that bloke's amnesia, isn't it? You know, 1 minute running a spy agency, the next minute can't remember where he had lunch. It's extraordinary. 1 minute promising he'd never raise GST, the next minute raising it, and then forgetting he'd promised not to. Anyway, let's let bygones be bygones. We're bigger than that. That was last election. We're preparing for the next one. We're supporting the bill. We're supporting the tidy-ups on GST. But that brings me to the next issue. Members will recall the tax switch. That was the much heralded idea, and one of really only two ideas that the government's had in the economic area since coming to office, that they would swap increasing GST on everybody for cutting the top tax rate for rich people, very rich people, and that would cause the economy to bloom and they wouldn't lose money because it would be fiscally neutral. Bad idea for everybody except the top few percent, because the economy didn't grow and it wasn't tax neutral. The taxpayer was out of pocket to the tune of $1.1 billion over 4 years. That was one of two bright ideas they brought to the table as a new government. The other one was selling state-owned assets. Neither has made a blind bit of difference to an economy struggling to get out of the mire. Mr Speaker, National's tax switch was therefore really a tax swindle. Hard-working Kiwi families ended up paying more than they needed to, and they saw little in the way of tax cuts. Mr Speaker, the current government's got more problems because, as we have long suggested, IRD's computer system is on the brink of falling over. And what that means is...
Part 5. I'm just struggling to find the part of Part 5 that the member is referring to. Mr
Speaker, it applies to KiwiSaver, and this tax system is required to implement a KiwiSaver. We specialise in long bows. So I'll come back to Part 5, Mr Speaker. Back to Kiwi. We have been on a little, what we might say, a little derivative tour through macroeconomics. We went from KiwiSaver to the savings rate. We went then to the tax system and the fiscal balance, which of course is impacted by the savings. And so back to KiwiSaver, of course, which is referred to in Part 5. Mr Speaker, it is a long bow, but it is relevant because what we're doing is actually cutting through the fine print to what's really important to New Zealand households, and that is being able to pay the bill, put a few cents away for the rainy day, and make sure that they've left something for their own retirement, something for their kids. Mr Speaker, New Zealand needs KiwiSaver, and it needs it to be bigger, it needs it to be better, it needs it to be stronger, and National's record in this regard is not flash. It cut the contribution rate from 4% to 2%. In this bill, it's lifting it from 2 to 3. We think it's a good idea. We're prepared to support the bill, but don't let anybody out there in listener land, Mr Speaker, get the wrong impression that that's a full solution.
Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I'm very happy to take a call on the Taxation Annual Rates, Returns, Filing and Remedial Matters Bill, and we're on Part 5, dealing with, among other things, changes to the